Hello, my name's David Dodman. I'm very pleased to be part of the African Cities Research Consortium, and I work in the Human Settlement Research Group at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And for the past 12 or 13 years, I've been spending a lot of my time working on climate change issues in cities across the Global South, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And some of that's been engaging with the UNFCCC Conference of Parties, the COPs, which take place every year and really are the most significant legal basis for deciding on global climate policy, mitigation, adaptation, and finance. So I've been at COP26 in Glasgow, engaging largely around the edges of the formal negotiations, largely with city governments, with research institutions, and with civil society who have things to say about the impacts of climate change on cities, how cities can respond by supporting emission reductions, and how cities respond by adapting to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. The cities agenda has been part of the COPs, at least for the last 9 or 10 years. I remember at COP17 in Durban, so that's about 10 years ago, where we had a very strong constituency of local governments, and the country president then, Jacob Zuma, came and addressed the local governments and really made it feel as though the official COP was beginning to take subnational and local governments into account more seriously. And then a couple of years later in Warsaw, I felt that we made significant progress because Cities Day was a formal part of the COP agenda. The COP presidents, the senior officials from the UNFCCC, the representatives of the major associations of local governments began to come together and firstly to see cities and local governments as key implementing partners, recognizing that global commitments couldn't be met without action at the level of cities. And then gradually seemed to recognize that cities were also significant in setting an agenda, not just implementing an agenda. And that felt very positive. And I suppose in some ways, I'm slightly less positive 5 or 6 years later, that the agenda perhaps hasn't moved on much further than that in the formal negotiation spaces of the COP. And of course, that's understandable. The negotiations take place between national governments, between the representatives of national governments. And there's no spam. There are observer organizations of different kinds, but it is an international multilateral process. But it also feels perhaps that we've become a bit stuck when there are discussions of financing, for example, while there's recognition of the need for financing to be spread more locally, there's little explicit recognition of that financing to go to cities, some recognition of it needing to go to local organizations, grassroots organizations. So perhaps one of the more promising things from COP26 for cities has been the strong recognition of locally led adaptation and financing for locally led adaptation, which does have implications for what can be done in cities around the world, including the cities that we're working on through ACRC. I think it's also important to remember that the big picture for the COP is also important for cities, that where we get to in terms of global emissions pathways, and what that means for global surface temperature increase is going to have major effects on the types of climate hazards that cities across Africa, and particularly the people living in low-income and informal settlements in Africa, are going to face. And in that regard, the COP has made some progress, but definitely not enough progress. And one of the things that's important to remember, I think, from the cities and poverty perspective, is that the level of temperature increase that we see is going to be even worse in cities and even worse for people living in poorly built, poorly planned, poorly insulated communities. So while to some of us, the difference between the pathway to 2.4, which we seem to be on, 2.4 degrees above pre-industrial, and the 1.5 degrees, which is the stated aim, may not seem that great a difference, for people who are working in outdoor and strenuous occupations, or for people who are living in poorly insulated houses, they're really going to feel the brunt of not reaching the commitments that that were agreed as the goals at Paris. So the big picture does matter to cities. I suppose around the edges of the COP, some of the things that were really interesting were the voices of community groups and community actors, and how for many of the organizations that often arrange the side events, the pavilions at the COP, which are not formally part of the negotiations, but provide the general atmosphere within which the negotiations are conducted. The challenges posed by having a fairly hybrid modality, actually, we used as an opportunity to bring voices, to have people speaking who might not otherwise have been able to attend in person and to speak. And so in a lot of the sessions that I was part of, we were able to bring in people who work directly with laborers in the informal economy in cities, highlight what the health impacts might be of climate change for them, and also to highlight the contribution that informal sector activities, particularly around waste management, can make to a lower carbon future, as well as a more resilient future. Bringing people who work directly with organizations of slum dwellers and residents of informal settlements to speak about how they are facing up to challenges, and how some of the processes of informal settlement upgrading can be done in ways that are participatory, integrated, and that address climate risk and the need for net zero carbon futures as well. So what would we hope for going forwards? I think that the next COP is going to be in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. I think that we will have a very strong voice there from African cities, that we need to make sure that the full range of needs and experiences from African cities are represented at COP27 in Egypt. That the fact that it will be in Africa means that I think we will see a stronger focus on adaptation and resilience. And I think that there is an opportunity to build on some of what happened at COP26 in Glasgow to make sure that these priorities, which cut across a whole urban agenda, urban planning, urban land use, housing, informal settlements, urban economies, to make sure we have an approach to looking at cities responding to climate change across these full range of issues that they're facing. Even though cities are not formally included within the negotiations process, we see lots of examples of how combinations of local government and organized groups within cities are making some of the changes which will help to achieve the goals that we've been aiming for through the COP. And these are both goals for carbon reduction and for adaptation. And there are some good examples from the cities that are part of the African Cities Research Consortium. I had the privilege of sitting on a panel alongside the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone, Yvonne Akisoya, and she highlighted a lot of the programs that they're doing around reforestation in the city, and how this contributes both to urban greening, urban cooling, and the slowing of runoff and the stabilization of slopes in a city that's had many problems with landslides and flooding, and also contributes to mitigation goals through capturing carbon. And this is an initiative from the city corporation, but also one that's really deeply involved in community processes and involving people in tree planting as part of a livelihoods program as well. Or in Nairobi, also a city that's part of ACRC, the integrated upgrading process in Mukuru, the special planning area, very large informal settlement in Nairobi, shows how the improvement of community infrastructure, roads, drainage, water and sanitation, the improvement of individual dwellings, and the improvement of housing and shelter, and taking this in an integrated way that doesn't just look at one bit of the challenges facing the neighborhood, but treats them all together. And also does this through strong partnerships between NGOs, community groups, and the local authority. And so what we have in both of those cases is a recognition that climate change is going to exacerbate some of the challenges of poverty and poorly planned urban development that these cities face already, and a recognition that addressing the climate challenges and the poverty and informality challenges needs to be done hand in hand if either of them is to be successful. And we need more positive examples like this from across the continent of Africa to show how action at different scales can help to add up to the type of global action that's needed to respond to something like climate change.